Welcome to Divorce and Relationships Decoded, the show that takes the guesswork out of love, loss, and everything in between. Hosted by me, Jennifer Perri, a CDC-certified divorce and empowerment coach, and Dr. Deborah Wilder, a divorce and relationship expert. This is the place where real conversations meet expert advice. So get ready to decode divorce and relationships like never before. Divorce and Relationships Decoded starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Jennifer Perri. I'm a CDC certified divorce and empowerment coach, and I am joined by my wonderful friend and colleague, Dr. Deborah Wilder, who is a divorce and relationship specialist. Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Jennifer?
Good, good. Today, we are going to talk about something that I love to talk about often. And it is self-awareness and why bringing self-awareness into your relationship is one of the greatest gifts that you can ever give. So let's dig into that a little bit today. And I want to talk with you, Dr. Wilder, first. How about we just break down what self-awareness is, first of all, and then what it means to bring into a relationship?
So I think self-awareness is really just being aware of what we say, how we say it, how we come across, how we affect others or impact others, the volume at which we speak. Do we speak really loudly? Do we speak with our hands? Do we frown when we talk? Do we just an awareness of us? But it could be our presence in a room. It could be our interactions, dynamics with people. Are we defensive? Are we assertive? Are we aggressive? Just aware of how we show up in the world. And it's very, okay, so that's in my mind, what that means, like how we really show up to know that how that impacts other people or things or places or whatever. Just that awareness, that knowledge of, again, how we show up is very beneficial. And we'll go ahead and get into that in a little bit. But what do you think about awareness?
I think everything you just said is accurate, is right, because being aware of self, obviously it's why it's self-awareness, but I think also being aware of, as you encounter different personalities and different relationships, I'm always myself. I always show up as myself. What is what you get. I think that's one of the benefits of just being transparent in who you are. But I also am aware of certain ways that I have to carry myself around certain people. And I think if you're completely, totally not self-aware, then you're not prepared for the different dynamics that come in different relationships. And I think I shared this before in one of our previous episodes. As we get older, no matter what it is that we do, we are essentially managing relationships with people, managing how we handle clients or managing how we handle relationships with our partners, our children, colleagues. You manage how you interact with other people. So I think definitely being self-aware of, I have a tendency to talk loud. I have a tendency to talk fast. For some people, I've been put in check about that, especially some of my clients in the financial world are older. So they're just like, if you could just slow down a little bit, if you could just explain it a little bit more. But I appreciate that. It allows me to have better relationships with people in my life, because they're letting you know what they need from you. And I think when you are aware of the fact that there may be different characteristics or personalities or qualities that you have that you bring to the table, may be a little too much or may need to be received in a different way to other people. So I think being okay with being self-aware, taking constructive criticism, as long as it's positive constructive criticism, that's good. All of that is good. But I agree with you completely. Being self-aware is probably one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself in any relationship that you have, especially in an intimate relationship with someone.
That's true, because then you're getting into really patterns. Like we've talked about attachment styles and things like that. If we're aware of things, that doesn't always mean everything's going to be okay. But if we're not aware, then we don't know what we need to maybe work on or continue to embrace or want to tweak a little bit. So on deeper levels, awareness is very important, and it shows up in different ways. And when we were talking about this today, I thought of something that one of my sons had said to me years ago. So I was divorced many years ago. My kids were little, and I was the primary parent. They lived with me the majority of the time. And my parenting, so I became really aware of my parenting style Actually, I became aware of it later, but my parenting style, now that I look back, was a much more permissive parenting style. So if my kids were upset, I wanted them to not be upset. So I would, and thankfully they weren't like very demanding kids or anything like that. But I might get them a toy, or I don't know, I can't even think right now of different things, but I was not a very firm parent or very strict parent. There were times when I was, but that was not my natural style. So as a more permissive parent, because my kids did struggle after divorce, it was rough on them, and I wanted them again just to not hurt. So I didn't want them to hurt. And something that my middle son, who's now, he's 20, almost 26. No, I'm sorry, he's almost 27, excuse me. He said to me, because we were talking about it, we talk a lot about relationships and family and stuff like that. And I was saying to him, I really hated it when you kids were uncomfortable, when you kids were sad or hurting. And what he said to me, he said, you felt more uncomfortable. You weren't comfortable with your own. It was about us, but you had a harder time dealing with your discomfort at our discomfort. Mm. And I don't even know if I'm explaining that so well, but it was one of those things, one of those moments when my wise children say things to me. And it was true. I was more uncomfortable with my discomfort at their discomfort, if that makes sense.
It does make total sense.
But I didn't realize that until my son said that to me. And so when we talk about self-awareness, and that stuck with me, it stuck with me, because I know I'm uncomfortable when my kids are uncomfortable, or people I care about are uncomfortable, even though I live in a world of discomfort. But I also, we've talked about that. I live in a world at work of discomfort, because I believe most of the time things can get better. But when it's my family or my children and I'm the mom, I just hated it when they were sad or hurting or whatever. But it was really my own discomfort at their discomfort that was problematic. And so it was one of those things that, had I been aware of that earlier on, I wonder if it might have made a difference. It might not have made a difference. But again, it's that self-awareness that I didn't realize until my son brought it to my attention a number of years ago. So the self-awareness thing is actually very interesting, to be able to discover things about ourselves. And many times we don't know those things until we're confronted with a situation in which we have to show up, or we do show up in a certain way, and we wouldn't know otherwise. Many people can say, I would never have done that, or I would have done. Sometimes that's accurate. Other times you just have no idea until you're in that kind of a situation. I'd be curious if you have had moments when you've had that kind of aha moment, wow, whether it's from one of your kids or somebody else, when there was a discovery about something about you that you really weren't aware of.
Oh, that's happened off and on throughout my adult life. There are more things I have found out about myself being married to my husband I really didn't know existed, but I also think it was because I was never aligned with a person that I wanted to explore those areas. I've always loved to travel, but was really uncomfortable with going out of the country. I would go and I would be like, okay, when are we going back home? Carm and I travel outside of the country a lot. And now I am just so present and focused and there and enjoying things and doing stuff that I normally would have not done before. I don't ski. I've never skied my entire life. And I had used my legs for a while. I probably would just fall right down the mountain and slide. So I never liked going up in the gondolas or whatever those ski.
Oh yeah, the ski lifts.
But he likes to ski, and there's been some places when we travel in Canada that you would go up them just to sightsee and look around and all that. So that has been a new thing for me, and trying different foods and trying different things. Those are all new discoveries that about myself I would have never stepped into. But I think you just become aware of, what am I missing? Or you become aware of, I'm with somebody who totally gets me. So if I don't like it, they're not going to hang it over my head. And then with what happened with me with GBS, there's things that I didn't understand before about myself and about my abilities. I've always known I was a strong person, but I also think until I was faced with that, there are things about me and my strength and my belief in myself and my mindset that were truly awakened during that period of time. And I'm very aware now that as something that comes into my life, if it's a little bit of a derailment or a challenge, I don't even think about it twice. I may get a little stressed about it here and there and all, but I know that it's going to be fine. I know that I'm going to get through it. So I think there have been lots of little glimmers and some real aha moments. And I think it has to do with maturity, and it has to do with being in a comfortable environment with a person that you're supposed to be with. At least so for me, I tell my husband everything. But then I know if I share something with a friend, they may get 75% of the story. I think it's being aware of how to shift in and out of different relationships, because I do feel that you can show up authentically in every relationship as
Mhm.
yourself. However, there is a difference too in the information and the level of comfort that you have. How does being self aware and authentic intersect? Or are they two totally different things?
That's interesting. I think they can be. So authentic is, I think, is more of a behavior
Okay.
as far as it's being authentic, but how do you demonstrate authenticity? Like you and Carm have an authentic trust relationship. And I think the things that you were talking about before have to do with how you show up when you trust somebody, when you are with someone whom you trust completely. You show up differently. I think we all show up differently based on levels of trust or things like that. But being authentic doesn't always mean you have to share everything. But yes, you show up, like you said, waste what you get with me, pretty much. Of course, my work, I don't know, my work stuff is not that different from my personal self. I may have different kinds of conversations, of course, and things like that, but the way I talk to the folks I work with is how I show up with everybody in my life. But the authentic part is, and part of this is being authentic or showing up as yourself as you are might not be the best choice sometimes. Let's say, because I was wondering about this too when you brought up authentic, it's great to know your authentic self. It's good to know who your authentic self is. But let's say you're really sarcastic and you grew up in a family where that sarcastic humor was fine. But you're now with other people who don't like it because they feel insulted. A put down, a sarcastic put down, people can say there's truth in jest. Some people might not like your sarcasm, but if that's your authentic self, that's the self
But I
awareness
think that's
part.
where self awareness comes in, right? Absolutely. Being your authentic self and showing up and being jovial and engaging and all that. But knowing that if you curse in front of a certain person, or if you come at them with sarcasm, or if you, even like in the political realm, if you ingest or saying something, I know people and very dear friends who that is a very, you just don't even walk down that path. It's not
Yeah,
a conversation that you have. But I think that is where self awareness and authenticity really need to be really good friends and understanding each
I
other.
love that. That's so true. I love that. Best buddies for
Best buddies.
sure. Because
Yeah,
some people can
that's a
get,
great example.
some people can have a tendency toward being defensive. And that's something to know about. Because if you show up in a defensive way, that doesn't usually lead to greater conversation at that time. It could at some point, but just again, being aware if I am yeah, so with the cursing, let's say I grew up, we were not allowed to curse. Like we didn't say that in my house or anything else out loud in front of our parents. So to being around others who did curse and were comfortable with that, let's say in front of their parents or whatever, so just being aware, just like you're saying, there's certain times you would be your more jovial, expressive self, and other times you're not necessarily going to do that on a stage, perhaps. So that doesn't mean that our behavior, if it's not so appropriate in one setting, is bad. But I think how we show up in relationships really does make a difference. Again, if we tend to be defensive, to be aware of that might encourage us to listen better, to do a better job at trying to understand what the other person is wanting us to hear rather than feeling attacked, unless we're absolutely being attacked, that sort of thing. So that self-awareness is a gift, because it really is a gift to ourselves and to those around us, because those relationships can grow and be enhanced. And you mentioned also something earlier about being able to receive feedback. I think it's important to be able to receive feedback like I did from my son. And that was, again, one of those light bulb moments. And that I'm so glad I heard. I could have gotten defensive. I could have argued with him, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to get, it caught me by surprise. But certainly there are times when I get defensive. Please do not get me wrong. Plenty of times I get defensive. And sometimes I have to just bite my tongue or not say anything and just wait a moment and then try to figure out, okay, how am I going to respond here? So even as a psychologist, I get defensive sometimes and don't always show up in the ways that are always terrific as far as not getting caught up in a conversation or going there or getting engaged in something that really isn't so productive. But I try. I think we are defensive creatures as humans anyway, so that is something that we have to tend to fight. But if we're aware of that, it makes it a lot easier. Or as you were saying, you've got a lot of energy to show up at certain meetings. You may want to lower the volume a little bit. I'm not saying you, but someone who shows up who's got a, let's say not you, but a booming voice. And a lot of times too, I know I work with couples where typically it's not the woman who has the more booming voice, but let's say you're dealing with someone who has a deeper voice and comes across as a little more intensely. The partner might take that as the person's upset versus being expressive. So if you're aware that you have that kind of booming kind of voice or that low, and you may tend to raise your voice when you get enthusiastic, being aware of that is important if you're with someone who really doesn't respond so well to that, even though that's your authentic self and you might not mean to be scaring the other person or whatever, but just that kind of awareness really does make a difference. That's the sort of thing that's a little bit on a little bit of a deeper level when you talk about the interpersonal relationships, and again, showing up authentically, but reading the room as well is important. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think there are more people nowadays that need to read the room than before. I think there are people that are super self aware of what's going on and how they carry themselves. And then there's people who just throw complete caution to the wind and they don't care.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of people there are some people that I look at in social media world and I'm like, wow, that's pretty brave of themselves. So to be like literally out there and saying what they full on saying what they believe, not caring who they hurt or isolate or disrespect. That's not for me. That doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
That's also not how I was raised. Right. I was raised in a home where you didn't talk about politics. You didn't talk about religion. You didn't talk about, you didn't talk about money. So like back in the day, I just turned 54. So 54 years ago, we weren't having the type of conversations that we have today. And we didn't have the access, obviously, to social media, cell phones, all of that. Imagine the world. Imagine what our world would have looked like if all that was happening back then. It would be totally different. But I think reading the room is probably the best way to talk about being self-aware, because you are going to have to be, you can show up. I walk into every room I'm at as myself. There's not much about me you can change. This is just who I am. Now, I am from Philadelphia. I love Jesus, but I also cuss a little. But I'm also mindful too, and trying to be as mindful as possible. Like I still to this day, 54 years later, will not cuss in front of my parents. I just won't, because we didn't grow up in a household that did. Now, my biological father did. And then obviously my mom has been married to my stepdad for 35 years, who's a pastor. So obviously, I think for me, it's out of just, hey, we didn't do this growing up. My mom comes here and visits. I don't, but I also try not to, I'm aware of when I'm around people who I know their faith, or I know their belief, or I know what bothers them. I try to be very respectful of that. I do, but I can still show up and be me. But I think there are people now, and I've shared before, my quantity of friends is very small by design, because I want very quality people in my life, and I have amazing people in my life. You're one of those, but I don't need to have tons and tons of people and friends, and I just don't. I think it's just because for me, I want to be able to be in a circle of friends where I can be my authentic self. I People are aware of how I feel about them, and I'm aware of how they feel about me and expectations and things like that. But I think there is a level of awareness that either people are like taking it to the extreme or who are just not doing anything at all about it. I think there's not an in between. You can't really have conversations with people like you used to before that you would think. Now I can, but again, it's because of the quality of person I think that's in my life, that we have mutual respect and love for each other and understanding. And hey, if you want to talk about a different political party or a different religion or a different, by all means, I'm going to hear you out and give you the opportunity and hold space for you to share your thoughts. And because that's just who I am as a person, that's who I've chosen to show up and be. It is who I am authentically as well, because I believe that we should be able to allow people to have conversations and still love them anyway. Just me. That's not our world anymore,
Right.
unfortunately.
I agree.
Depends on who you voted for, who you like, who your partner is. Like that is just the world that we live in. And it's unfortunate, but it also allows little pockets of really good relationships to show up all over the place. But I think bringing self awareness into any relationship that is very meaningful to you is important and is absolutely one of the greatest gifts not only you can give that other person but also yourself. And I would tell you, never settle in a relationship that doesn't allow you to be authentic and allow you to express yourself in a way that if there's something about your personality or characteristics or whatever, somebody can share that. And if they're sharing it from a place of love, consider it. My husband and I are both alphas. We both talk fast. We both have very strong personalities, but we know how to compliment one another. And we also know how to say, hey, you're getting a little loud, or hey, you're getting a little, because we know it's coming from a place of love and we know how to dial it down when we need to. We're not changing who we are, we're
Mhm.
not compromising anything. We just know that we're reading the room and we know that this is the way that we need to show up in that space.
And I think people are very fortunate when they are in a relationship in which they could do that. Because as you were talking, I was thinking, I work a lot with people who are in relationships with emotional, or even going through divorce with from an emotional abuse or a narcissist. And if you're in that kind of a narcissistic relationship, at some point you kind of lose who you are, and you
Oh,
don't
for
even
sure.
know, you may not even know who your authentic self is at that point, and you really learn to not show up and feel that you cannot show up as yourself. You have to, there's so much that goes into that. But as you were talking, I was thinking about those relationships where people can't really, can't safely, I'll say, show up as themselves. And so as they start to get out of that, and as they start to work on themselves and recover and rebuild and learn about themselves again, that's when they can learn about who their authentic selves, either who they are for the first time or who they used to be, and work on getting back to that. But when we're in relationships that are healthy or relatively healthy, it's much easier to show up and be self-aware versus, let's say, in that kind of an abusive relationship where self-awareness is really a matter of safety. And so it's not who we are, but how we need to show up so that we can remain as safe as we can. But it's a very important thing. The more aware we are, we've talked about this before, I think in the attachment styles episode, the more aware we are, the more we can do something about that and about our relationships or about different things in our lives. Awareness and knowledge, that's powerful stuff. And without it, we're just walking through blindly, or we're just going to be with interactions with other people where it's reactive, not so smooth. But self-awareness is important, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves just to maybe reevaluate or just take note of how we are showing up in different ways. And when you talk about not settling, that's ideal. To be in a relationship in which you don't have to settle, that's ideal. That's wonderful to be in that. And when you talk about friends and people you want to have in your inner circle, that just goes straight to trust, where we can really show up as our authentic selves. And then each layer moving out, that doesn't mean we're not authentic, but it's just it could be a little bit differently. We might not feel as comfortable in certain ways as we move out of that circle of closeness to different kinds of relationships. But I think it's an important topic. I think we could all look at ourselves and do some reviewing at different times in our lives. I like to talk with folks about doing reevaluations every once in a while. How are things going in our relationship? What's happening? How am I showing up? What do I need to do maybe to do better here, or things going well there? And that doesn't mean I'm always going to do what I need to do better, but at least I'm aware of what I really need to be doing. It makes a big difference. It makes a big difference when you have that ability to look at yourself objectively, which sometimes isn't so easy to do, but it's interesting nonetheless.
It is. And I think as we get ready to wrap up today, I think probably the most important thing is, if you haven't listened to all of our episodes, just go back and listen. Just binge listen, binge watch them. Just go back, because there are a lot of things that we talk about that are it's like stackable habits. It's like stackable things that you can do to make your relationship better, things that you can do to make you're going through divorce and navigating the other side better. And there's a lot of things that we talk about where it's just about how you can just be better as a person and how you can show up better for yourself first and foremost, but then for the people in your life who need you and who depend on you. I've reached a level of success in my life I never thought I would. And that has a lot to do with taking criticism and being open to constructive criticism, and people who I know who are invested in my success, who came alongside and said, maybe you need to stop a little bit of this, but you need to do more of this. Or I was always open to that. And what Dr. Wilder and I do is we come on every week in ways that we want to inject our knowledge and our expertise into making sure that you are having the type of relationship that you deserve, and that you are finding little nuggets of what we share that you can incorporate in your own lives and make them your own. So before we wrap up today, is there anything that you would like to add to this topic? I've loved it. Talking about being authentic, talking about being aware, talking about doing both of those things in a world right now that's pretty judgmental. I think it's an important topic to have a discussion around.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's always a fun discussion with you. I always love these things, but this is a good one too. The more aware we are and the more open we are to, again, how we show up in the world can make a really big difference in a positive way.
For sure. We are going to get ready to wrap up for today. If you have not subscribed to us yet, on you, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you like this message and like this video, and also share it with someone who needs this message. So if you happen to have a topic that you would like for us to dive into and discuss, if you have a question, please send it to questions@drdecoded.com. And you will just have to come back next week to see what we're talking about next. But as always, Dr. Wilder, it's great to spend this time with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your guidance in this. And we'll be back again next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
That's a wrap for this episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. If this conversation resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, healing, growth, and transformation happens one conversation at a time. If you have a question, a story, or a topic you'd love for us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a note at questions@drdecoded.com. Your thoughts and experiences are always welcome here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another insightful episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. Until then, take care and keep moving forward.